Kemco published RPGs gained a negative reputation in the mobile market years ago from how often they released games from their various developers. But they've come a long way over the years, not only with making neat little retro RPGs, but improving systems, plotlines, and becoming pretty decent games of the genre. What we are going into today is one of those better games. With a surprising amount of story depth and one key change to the typical JRPG formula, let's dive in. Here is my review of Isekai Rondo for the Nintendo Switch. With story, this game centers around Sho, a man with bad luck and is a literal punching bag for the retail world, fired from several companies and treated like absolute garbage by his corporate employers. One day he's on his way home and narrowly avoids being run over by a car, only to have a potted plant fall from a tall building, instantly killing him. He's then reincarnated into a game-like world filled with magic, heroes, and a villainous overlord demon. Gifted with learning passive abilities in this world, he travels with the hero Viola and two demons on a journey to save the world, despite him just wanting a calm life of moderate work and moderate rest. Now, the story I find interesting for a couple reasons. First, it clearly views itself as a game-like world with passive abilities not only being a thing in gameplay, but the story itself. The plot references everyone having and learning passives, and it is very meta in that way of speaking about abilities and levels like it's part of their world and not just an arbitrary game mechanic. The plot is also fairly developed, especially for a game like this. You don't get incredibly deep 30-minute character studies, but you get a pretty good amount of depth and background on the main cast, a lot of the supporting cast, and a lot of interesting conversations with those reincarnated trying to explain concepts like floppy disks and soy sauce to natives of the magical world. When it comes to gameplay, this is a retro-style RPG. As you progress through the game, you'll be navigating towns and dungeons, doing quests, and fighting enemies in turn-based combat. First and foremost, this game is filled with a lot of the typical Kemco and EXE Create features. You have premium currency that you earn from battles and spend at an in-game shop to get special equipment through RNG, various upgrades to enhance things like damage, experience, and money gain, and you get little seeds that you can plant in your little farm to get stat boosts. But on to main progression. The first thing that feels weird here is the lack of a world map. Most of these Kemco RPGs are one-to-one for the classic JRPG formula, but this game offers you a fast travel system and no overworld to traverse on foot, boat, and airship. As you unlock more locations via story progression, you can talk to your carriage driver to go to these new places rather than actually walking there via an overworld. Not that it's a huge problem, as it does help the fast pace of the game keep that pace up. Outside of that, your main way of progressing the game is through the dungeon and places the story pushes you to. Instead of having dungeons littered around the game's map, the world is separated into towns in one giant dungeon with several biomes connected to each other. The thing is, you have to be a certain rank in the guild to enter each dungeon, essentially the game having all dungeons in one place, but you unlock them as you go through the story and rank up from doing side quests and finishing off bosses. I do kind of like this, as it forces you to use the side quest mechanic for progression with getting points for evaluation exams and upgrades for new dungeons, instead of the quest system being there and just ignored for being optional. It can feel a little grindy with having to get the next rank for story progression, but when that sort of grind is maybe 10 to 15 minutes, I'm not sure it's even worth calling a grind. Outside of that, it advances like a typical one of these RPGs, with you getting little cinematic scenes as you enter places for story events, and you fight off enemies in traditional turn-based combat. The battle system is a little enhanced with a lot of passive abilities that you level up as you do certain things, like proficiency against specific enemy types, or even something as simple as walking around so much, increasing your walking skill. Though I do admit that the walking passives part of dungeon exploration is a little interesting. These games always have hazards like collapsing floors or spikes, and you gain passives through the story to let you enhance that walking ability and avoid them. This game also has a lot of features to help you grind up your levels. Every floor of the dungeon has these little towers that let you modify encounter rate, do 3 battles in succession for a lot of experience, and summon special metal or chest enemies with a bit of the in-game premium currency. This is very useful for level grinding, which you might have to do a little bit early on, but at the same time, it can very easily open a door to completely breaking the entire game. To give an example, I was around level 100 about halfway through the game, arguably over-leveled at that point, and even one of the metal enemy fights in the dungeon I was currently going through would shoot me up by 10 to 20 levels. Doing that for only about 20 minutes sent me from level 100 to level 500, effectively removing all semblance of difficulty from the entire game, as I could auto-battle and almost one-shot every single boss all the way to the final boss. Now, even with that game-breaking option in mind, let's go into Content and Link, which is pretty okay for this sort of RPG. On the normal difficulty with two 20-minute grind sessions, one for getting me from level 100 to 500 and another to reach the level cap of 999 for the final boss, I finished the game after playing for around 12 hours. Considering this is $15, that's not bad. It's not like some of the longer As Divine games, but considering that the story did such a good job of fleshing out the world, giving you big stuff going on and decent character development, I would say it's still pretty good. Next up is presentation, which can be a little odd. With visuals, the game looks good. They always mimic an almost Super Nintendo design with the pixel art, and that part of the game looks great. What's strange is performance. As you move around the larger dungeons of the game, you see weird frame drops when the camera moves around. It's not terrible, but it's pretty wonky and messes with what should be a pristine flow with a game that looks like this. Next up is battery life. Isekai Rondo gives the original and light models a battery range of about 2 to 3.5 hours, while the V2 and OLED models get 5 to 6 hours. In conclusion, Isekai Rondo has brought more of Kemco's known brand of retro RPG gameplay to the Switch. Now, on the downside, there are some weird little frame drops when moving the camera around, but it's got a good story to it, and the gimmicks of passives not only in gameplay but in the meta-like story scenes are really interesting. If you like the retro RPGs and don't mind not having a world map to explore, this one is pretty good. Reviews to Go rates Isekai Rondo for the Nintendo Switch an 8.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.